All right, the NFL draft is 3 weeks from Thursday. We've got our latest mock draft from Ryan Wilson coming to you as we set the draft order once again. 49ers trading up to 3 a few weeks ago. Some whispers that the Falcons may be looking to trade down, or maybe they grab a quarterback there. Maybe Matt Ryan's replacement they get at 4. Panthers trading for Sam Darnold, so they're likely not going to take a quarterback at number 8. The Broncos sitting there at 9. Maybe they trade up as well. We'll see. Still some time to go. Some moves to be made. We saw a big one on Monday in the NFL with the Jets trading Darnold to Carolina. So let's get down to it. We have Ryan Wilson, our draft expert, along with Pete Prisco. I'm not sure what we call him. He does a mock draft like every month or so. Going to do one more, I believe, before the actual draft in a few weeks. Ryan, at number 1, there's really, you wrote here 2 words, it's happening. Trevor Lawrence to Jacksonville, we don't need to spend much time on this. It is happening, it's just a formality.
That's right, Chris. Great career at Clemson, great pro day, had surgery. He'll be healthy in time for the start of the season, and probably before then. He's Urban Meyer's guy. You know, Pete's talked about this every time we bring up Trevor Lawrence. The expectation is that they make a lot of strides this year, perhaps get close to what used to be 500, maybe 8 wins now in the 17-game season, and then next year they're making a run for the playoffs. If that doesn't happen, that's a disappointment, and it starts with your franchise quarterback in Trevor Lawrence. First overall pick. It's only a matter of waiting the 20-something days until it's official.
You say that's 100% happening, as does just about every draft expert covering this thing. And then at number 2, you've got Zach Wilson going to the Jets. And Ryan, you're putting that at about 75, 80% right now. If it's not Zach Wilson, who else would it be?
That's the question. And we heard Joe Douglas, the GM, today talk about sort of tiptoe around the idea that it's not going to be Zach Wilson. He mentioned Steve Young, the former NFL quarterback who played at BYU, suggesting that it's going to be Zach Wilson, and he said Steve Young has some pretty good BYU connections. But our own Jonathan Jones said it feels closer to 100% for him that Zach Wilson's their guy. So I don't know where else they would go other than try to trade down, but they've just moved on from Sam Darnold, so I don't think it's a situation where they're going to trade down. They're going to take their guy, and their guy appears to be Zach Wilson. It would be foolish, I believe, to take someone like Penei Sewell, the offensive tackle. Not that they don't need an offensive tackle, but who's going to play quarterback? So it's either Zach Wilson or Mac Jones or Trey Lance or Justin Fields. But by all indications, Zach Wilson's been their guy for some time, and it's just sort of slowly leaking out that it's all but certain at this point, Chris.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely Zach Wilson. Put that on 100%. He's their guy. He's been their guy. The only argument that I heard was that some people in the building wanted to stick with Sam Darnold and maybe move that pick. But they are all in on Zach Wilson. And this notion that Zach Wilson is as close as he is to Trevor Lawrence, I don't buy it. In fact, I think there's a big gap between Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson. And I don't think there's a big gap between Zach Wilson and Justin Fields. I think when you look at this quarterback hierarchy, it's number 1, clearly Trevor Lawrence, and then you have a little bit of a drop down.
Pete, did they do Zach Wilson a disservice by trading Sam Darnold out of there and basically saying, okay, whoever we draft here, Zach Wilson, you might be our starter from day 1?
No, I think that's the right thing to do in this scenario. You got a new coach, you got a new organization, you got a new offense. Why not take the kid, draft him, bring him in, and let him learn on the fly? And again, I say this all the time, but every quarterback I've ever talked to told me that they learn more in one game playing than they did an entire season standing on the sideline watching. So you got to get him in there and let him play. So I think it was the right thing to do. You don't want him to kind of ease him in. Then you got a problem. Sam Darnold gets benched. Maybe some players like Sam Darnold. Now we know this will be Zach Wilson's team.
Okay, looking like it's going to be Trevor Lawrence 1, Zach Wilson 2 to the Jets, and then San Francisco moving up to number 3. It's Mac Jones, again, the pick from Ryan Wilson. Pete, I'll give you first word on this. Are you coming around to the idea yet that Mac Jones is a top 3 quarterback in this draft?
Hell no. No way. I don't see it. I think he's a good player. I wouldn't trade 2 first-round picks to go up and draft him. I think he's an accurate player. He played behind great offensive line. He played with great receivers, and he did a nice job. Look, I followed his career for a long time. He's a Jacksonville kid. I've known what he can do for a long time. He's a good player. He should be in the first round. A lot of guys I talk to around the league think he's a second-round pick. A lot of guys I talk to, some of them think he's a third-round round pick. I don't think moving up to draft him in this spot is the right thing to do. I think Justin Fields is a better prospect and he'll be a better NFL quarterback. So to answer your question, no, I would not take him in this spot.
Pete's right about one thing, in that the 49ers gave a ton to move up to get whoever the quarterback's going to be. It certainly feels like Mac Jones. But if Kyle Shanahan thinks that's his guy, then I understand it on some level. Is it too expensive? Yes, it is. But I feel like, you remember when Mark Madsen did that insane dance when the Lakers won the championship? I feel like doing a Mark Madsen dance to celebrate the fact that Mac Jones is going pretty much where I said he was going to go for the last few months. I said it's going to be a top 5 pick. People looked at me crazy and thought I was insane. That's what some NFL teams were saying to me. And on the surface, it does sound a little nuts because Mac Jones doesn't look physically like the other quarterbacks in terms of his athleticism and arm strength. But he is so incredibly smart pre-snap, post-snap, and Kyle Shanahan loves quarterbacks that know where to go with the ball, don't make mistakes, throw to the open receiver, move the ball down the field. And I think that fits what they want. And look, it could very well be Justin Fields going here. It could be an elaborate smokescreen. But it certainly feels like Mac Jones, based on the things we've heard and based on the things that I've heard even late into the college football season. So if he goes here, here's the downside, and Pete sort of touched on this. This is a ton of pressure on Mac Jones because you've sold the farm to move up to get Mac Jones, who isn't the best athlete among the quarterbacks in this class. And the expectations is that they have to win immediately with Mac Jones. So that's a lot to expect. But look, he's met every challenge he's ever faced. He played better than Tua at Alabama that last year with fewer playmakers. We rarely talk about that part of it. I think he'll be successful in the NFL. Is he going to be an elite quarterback? I don't know. I think that's to be determined. But I understand what Pete's trepidation is in terms of trading to give up everything to move up to number 3 to potentially get Mac Jones there.
Pete, we know what you think. We know you don't think he's a top 3 pick in this draft. But do you think it's going to happen? I mean, do you think Mac Jones is going to be a pick? Whether you like it or not, is this happening?
Yeah, I think it is. And then guys I talked to around the league, they think it's happening too. Although, I still think Justin Fields is in play because I think he'd fit in that offense as well. But the way it looks to me right now, McCorkle fever in the Bay Area. Catch it. McCorkle fever, because that's his name. It's not Mac, it's McCorkle.
McCorkle Jones. That's what Petey Pie will be calling him pretty soon. Number 4, we break the string of quarterbacks here for Ryan Wilson. He has the Atlanta Falcons at number 4, taking Kyle Pitts, the tight end, and that would be as high as a tight end's been drafted in almost 50 years. But Ryan, what are the chances you think that Atlanta makes a move and somebody comes up to try to get in that 4 position with Atlanta trading back?
Well, this is interesting, Chris, because we know Sam Darnold's down in Carolina. There was no way the Falcons are trading down from 4 to number 8 with Carolina, division rival. So it seems like Carolina wiped their hands and went another direction. So there are going to be teams that could potentially be interested in moving up. I do think it's telling that, at least according to reports, that the Falcons may not be interested in a quarterback here. So what does that mean? They could go offensive line or Kyle Pitts, who I like a lot and could end up being the best pure pass catcher in this draft class. But there could be opportunities to move down. The Bears need a quarterback. We've talked about that. The Steelers, the Saints, the Patriots. That's a long way to move up to get someone like a Justin Fields. But if you feel that he's your guy, then you go get him. Trey Lance will also be in the mix. So there's a chance for these quarterbacks to be gone by the top 10, 11, 12 picks. But should Justin Fields get to 4, the Falcons will have a decision to make. That sounds like it won't include Justin Fields, but whether to trade down or whether to go in another direction with a player like Kyle Pitts.
Yeah, if they're not taking a quarterback at 4, we know the Bengals aren't going to be taking a quarterback with Joe Burrow, and Miami is sitting there at number 6 with Tua Tagovailoa, who they took in the top 10 last season. All right, let's move on to number 5 and the Bengals. And Pete, what do you think of Penei Sewell going to the Bengals in Ryan's latest mock?
Yeah, I think it's one of 3 players for the Bengals. It's either Penei Sewell, Kyle Pitts, or Jamar Chase, and they're in a good situation right now. Now, they could be one of those teams that moves back if somebody wants to go up and get a quarterback, and so I think they're in play as well because there's going to be a bunch of guys that can help them right away, and they can move back a couple spots. Let's just say the Lions want to move up. They can move back a couple spots and still get one of those guys. So I think the Bengals are in a good situation. I wouldn't take Penei Sewell here. I'd probably try and get an offensive lineman later in the draft. If Kyle Pitts fell to me, I'd take him, but in this scenario, I'd probably take Jamar Chase.
Okay, Jamar Chase is actually the next pick. He would fall to the Miami Dolphins at number 6 in Ryan Wilson's latest mock. And Ryan, that would give Tua Tagovailoa a much-needed weapon there at the wideout position.
Yeah, Pete talked last year about Tua not having any fire in the belly. Well, he's going to be surrounded by playmakers, so he's going to have to show some of that fire that we didn't see last year. And look, part of it was coming off the pandemic, no real training camps to speak of. He was thrown into the mix after Ryan Fitzpatrick was unceremoniously benched, and he struggled, and that's the reality of it. But he has to get better, Tua does. So surround him with playmakers. They have Devontae Parker, they have Preston Williams, they have Jakeem Grant. He has to be able to make throws down the field. Jamar Chase allows him to make throws to every level, short, intermediate, and deep. And there should be no excuses. The offensive line should be better. They can draft an offensive lineman to pair with the two guys they took in the top 40 last year, and the offense should improve. And that's just the reality of it. If it doesn't, we're going to question what's going on with Tua. So I think you start by surrounding him with playmakers, and Pete just talked up Jamar Chase as a possibility of the Bengals. If he's a possibility there, certainly he's a possibility for a Dolphins team that at times struggle to move the ball down the field. So I think it makes sense here. We'll see if it happens. We'll see if Jamar Chase is even available. But you have to surround Tua with playmakers to give him options, the options he didn't have a year ago.
Chase, the favorite to be the first wide receiver off the board, minus 300, but you could see Waddle and Devontae Smith potentially jumping into the top 10 as well. Let's move to number 7 and the Detroit Lions, Ryan. They went out and they made that swap, Matt Stafford for Jared Goff, but you have him taking a quarterback here in Justin Fields.
This is the first time in the weekly mock draft that I've had them taking a quarterback since Matthew Stafford went west and Jared Goff came back to Detroit. But I just feel like if Justin Fields is sitting here, new coach, new front office, and you have a chance for a quarterback that you really, really like, why would you pass on him? What sense does that make? Has Jared Goff, who played on one of the best under one of the best offensive minds in football, he struggled in Los Angeles with Sean McVay. What reason do you have to believe that he's going to come to Detroit, a dysfunctional organization over the last 20, 30 years, and find success? So if you don't think that's a slam dunk in terms of Jared Goff being a great player in Detroit, then you go with Justin Fields. Pete talked up his upside just a few minutes ago, and there is a lot to love about Justin Fields. He's only played about a year and a half worth of football if you count sort of the half season that the Big Ten had last year. He is only going to improve. So you have Jared Goff for 1 year. You can bring Justin Fields in perhaps 2 months into the season if you can't wait a whole year. And then in 2022, that's your guy. That's your franchise, and you're moving forward with a legit franchise quarterback who isn't just freshly removed from being traded from the team that didn't want him.
All right, so that's 4 quarterbacks off the board with Justin Fields there at 7 to the Lions. Moving to number 8, and it's the Carolina Panthers, who just went out, Pete, and traded for Sam Darnold yesterday, and they're giving him another weapon. I mean, he's got some good weapons on that offense already, but Jalen Waddle is the pick from Ryan Wilson here. Pete, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't like this pick, and I love Jalen Waddle as a player, and I understand getting him another weapon, but I think when you look at the Panthers, left tackle, glaring need for them, big time. You want to protect your quarterback. Well, I would take Christian Darrisaw on this spot. I know other people like Rashawn Slater. I think Slater has short arms and looks more like a guard or a right tackle to me. I think Darrisaw would step in and be their left tackle for a decade. So I would probably move in a different direction here. I would take somebody on the offensive line. If Penei Sewell fell down, maybe it would be him. If it's not him, then I would take Christian Darrisaw.
Yeah, Pete's right. Offensive line is certainly a need. I considered it here. Cornerback is also a need. You could take Patrick Surtain here as well. But I said, okay, let's get Sam Darnold, a playmaker, in much the same conversation we had about Tua, so he'll be out of excuses. They have Robbie Anderson. They have DJ Moore. Let's get one of the most explosive players in this draft class. And, Pete, this is a 2-round mock draft, so I don't know if you got to the page 2, but I did have the Panthers taking Dylan Radunz, the North Dakota State left tackle, who you could move around the offensive line if you needed to. So I did consider that. But I take your point. I know you like Darrisaw. I like Slater. Those guys happen to go there. I would be okay with it. But I love Jalen Waddle. I love the idea of him just running deep routes in Joe Brady's offense with a revitalized Sam Darnold trying to rekindle his career there in Carolina.
All offensive players so far through the first 8 picks. Let's move to number 9 in the Denver Broncos. Maybe they move up to try to get maybe a better quarterback. But in this draft, Ryan has them taking Trey Lance. Pete, I know you think that they probably need a new quarterback moving forward. Does Lance do it for you?
You know what? I'm not one of those guys that believes that just yet. I think you have to find out what you have in Drew Lock. I don't know if I would necessarily take Trey Lance in this spot. I think Trey Lance is a project. And when you look at the way the Broncos are being built, I think Vic Fangio wants to try and win this year. And I think Trey Lance is a guy who's going to take a little while. I mean, you watch him on tape. He's raw. He's a kid that needs mechanical work. He has a lot of mechanical flaws. There's a lot to like about him. He's athletic. He's big. He can throw it. He's got a great arm. arm. He's accurate at times, but I think mechanically he doesn't do a great job with his upper body. And I think there's going to be a lot of growth in terms of what he's going to need to do before he takes the field. So I don't think this is a pick for the Broncos. I think they play with Drew Lock, or they move up and maybe get one of the other guys. I don't think they would take Trey Lance.
Yeah, maybe if a Justin Fields is standing there, or maybe if they don't have to give up that much to get up and get Justin Fields, maybe that's the play for the Denver Broncos, who are sitting at 9. Finally, a defensive player coming at number 10, Ryan, Patrick Surtain, the first defensive player off your board.
This feels like a match that almost certainly is going to happen if the board falls anything close to this. I feel like they've been targeting a cornerback in these mock drafts, not just mine, but any ones that you happen to look at, pretty much since the season ended back in late December, early January. They need help there. They made some moves in free agency to bolster the defense, so they could potentially go offensive line here, and that was certainly a consideration. I know Cowboys fans were angry at me in previous mock drafts for targeting offensive line, but that's a legit need. Offensive line isn't as sexy as a playmaking cornerback. I get that, but Patrick Surtain, I know he's Pete's #1 guy. He was my #2 guy, and Caleb Farley had that back injury that underwent surgery a few weeks ago. There's a chance Caleb Farley falls, so Surtain is almost certainly going to be the first cornerback off the board, and if he gets out of the top 10, it will be sort of surprising, but I think 10 is a perfect landing spot for him. Reunite with Trevon Diggs, his Alabama teammate from a few years ago, who was a second-round pick of the Cowboys in 2020.
All right, so in the top 10, 5 quarterbacks, the first 9 offensive players, the first defensive player to the Cowboys, Patrick Surtain, at number 10. When we come back, we move into the teens in Ryan Wilson's latest mock. It's a 2-round mock. You can find the whole thing on CBSSports.com. But on the other side, we're going to find out where the Heisman Trophy winner Devontae Smith lands. The Eagles are coming up at number 12. All right, recapping the top 10 from Ryan Wilson's latest mock on CBSSports.com. Quarterbacks going 1, 2, 3. Justin Fields going 7 to the Lions. And the Broncos getting Trey Lance. The first defensive player selected was at number 10, Patrick Surtain, to the Cowboys. The Giants are up at number 11. We have Ryan Wilson and Pete Prisco with us here on CBS Sports HQ. Ryan, going with Micah Parsons, the linebacker for the Giants. Explain the choice.
Yeah, so Micah Parsons had some off-field issues at Penn State early in his career, and I asked around about whether that was a concern about him dropping. And the conversation was, yeah, it could play a little role. It was less about what happened and just about him being immature. And there were also concerns about how much does he truly love football in terms of being a 22-year-old with a lot of money. So he could slip a little bit. He's a top 5 player. I know Pete doesn't like him quite as much as I do, but the way he played in 2019 before he opted out was lights out. And this was a guy still learning the position. So Patrick Graham, the defensive coordinator with the Giants, did a really good job last year. Why not give him another player in the middle of that defense where they do have some needs at linebacker and just have Micah Parsons running around hitting everything that moves in a division that's wide open? Now, you could go offensive line here, you could go wide receiver as well, but if Micah Parsons is sitting here, he's as a top 5 talent, as I mentioned, at 11, I think it makes a lot of sense to take him, and warts and all. We see that happen all the time with players who are really good, and that's not to say that Micah Parsons is a bad person, just based on what I've heard coming out of his college career. So I think he's a top 5 pick. He falls to 11, and the Giants grab him.
Yeah, I think he's a talented player, and he's got a ton of athletic ability, and everybody's looking for that off-the-ball linebacker who can run. We saw that with Devin White and what he meant to the Tampa Bay defense. So I get it. I just think like you mentioned, I think some people are going to take a closer look and say, you know what, I'm going to let him slip down the board a little bit. And I think Jamin Davis from Kentucky is a better player. I think when we get this all done in about 4 years, we're going to look back and say, okay, Parsons was ranked as the top linebacker in the draft, but I think Jamin Davis will end up being a much better pro player.
Interesting. Davis, I'm not seeing him in this entire first-round mock, Ryan. Are you much lower on Davis than Pete is?
No, actually, I'm not that much lower. I have him going 37th to the Eagles in the second round. Pete and I were talking about this yesterday, and I was shocked that he loved him more, Jamin Davis, more than Micah Parsons. But Jamin Davis is incredibly raw. Didn't start until last year in 2020 for Kentucky, and Pete is right on. He is an absolute animal as a playmaker. Incredible athleticism. I think he ran in a sub-4 forward at his pro day, which doesn't, at the end of the day, it's not the end-all be-all. But the way you couple that with what he did on the field, and there's a lot to be excited about. I feel like Micah Parsons is further along in his development. I won't go so far as to say that Jamin Davis is the better player, but hey, if Pete is on that train, he should certainly stay on it, and I think he could be onto something. But there's no shame in having Jamin Davis as a first-round pick. That won't be a surprise, I think, if 3 weeks from now that actually ends up being reality.
All right, let's move to number 12. That's where the Philadelphia Eagles sit. And Ryan, I know you've had a lot of back and forths with Eagles fans throughout your mock drafting time over the last several months. I can't imagine they were too happy with you passing up on Devontae Smith for Rashawn Slater, the offensive lineman.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could sort of blame the Eagles for trading all over the draft board. They were at number 6 at one point. They did move down and got that extra first-round pick down to 12. So that says to me a couple things. Number one, that we're rolling with Jalen Hurts, so they're not going to be in the quarterback market. And number two, we need to make Jalen Hurts better. Now, you're exactly right. Devontae Smith makes Jalen Hurts better on the outside. They do need help there. They drafted Jalen Reagor last year, and he struggled with injuries, and there's no reason to think he won't improve in year 2 as a first-round pick. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside hasn't really worked out as a former second-rounder, but that offensive line is in shambles. And we saw that play in and play out last year as Carson Wentz was picking himself off the turf, and later, towards the end of the season, when Jalen Hurts was doing the same thing. So, again, it's not a sexy pick, an offensive lineman, but Rashawn Slater is a really good football player. Pete mentioned short arms. He measured 33-inch arms, which is right at the cutoff for some NFL teams, whether he can stay outside or play inside. Either way, wherever you put him, he's going to help the Eagles immediately and help Jalen Hurts immediately and help this offense immediately. So I think that's why you take him here. He's a top 10, top 11, top 12 talent. So it's not a surprise that he goes this high. But again, Eagles fans, I understand if they'd rather have an explosive down-the-field playmaker.
Well, let's not forget, though, the Eagles have Andre Dillard coming back off an injury. He should be their left tackle. Brandon Brooks is coming off an injury. He'll be the right guard. And Lane Johnson missed a lot of time with injuries last year as well. And Kelsey has decided to come back. So if you're drafting Slater, it's probably to play guard. And I don't think he's going to be the left tackle ahead of Andre Dillard, who you used a first-round pick on a couple years ago. So I would probably go in a different direction here. Offensive line, you can never have enough of them. I get it. I think this kid's going to be a talented player. I do think he'd be an all-world guard. But they also need corner help, and that's something to keep an eye on as well. Talking to some people up there, they are looking for a corner as well.
All right, sticking with offensive linemen here at number 13, Ryan going with Elijah Vera Tucker to the L.A. Chargers. Got to protect the franchise quarterback, Ryan. Justin Herbert was a star his rookie season.
That's right, Chris. And I know they signed some guys. Corey Linsley, the center, Matt Filer, the right tackle. They signed some guys in free agency to bolster that offensive line. Trey Turner's gone. They need help at guard, and Elijah Vera Tucker can play guard. He can play tackle. He's also a victim of short arms, so his future is probably most likely inside, but he more than held his own. He played at a really high level last year for USC at left tackle after Austin Jackson left to the pros to join the Miami Dolphins. So I think if the plan is to protect Justin Herbert, and that seems like a pretty good plan under a new coaching staff, then this is the direction you could certainly think about. Pete could probably prefer to see Christian Darrisaw, his guy here. But wherever you go, protecting the franchise quarterback has to be job number one. We talked about it with Joe Burrow early in the draft. We talk about it with the other quarterbacks that are in this draft class. They have to be protected. Elijah Vera Tucker is a really good football player, top 15 talent. And if he went 13 and guys like Kyle Pitts are already off the board, and Kyle Pitts will be long gone by 13, this is the direction that I feel like you go if you're the Los Angeles Chargers.
Okay, well, Pete's guy, Christian Darrisaw out of Virginia Tech, is coming up next, number 14. That's the pick to the Minnesota Vikings. And Pete will protect your franchise quarterback, Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, and you know what? They need a left tackle. This would make all the sense in the world. Remember, they drafted Ezra Cleveland last year, and they thought he might be one of the tackles of the future, but he did a really nice job at right guard. So if you could find a left tackle, which I think Darrisaw will be an outstanding player, you can keep Cleveland at right guard, and that strengthens your line across the board. So this pick would make a lot of sense. And in fact, I think if the board played out this way, I think the Chargers would take Darrisaw. They have a major hole at left tackle. You mentioned it. Linsley and Filer kind of upgrade inside, because I think they're going to play Filer at guard. He can play right tackle, but if they do that, then they need a left tackle. So I think Darrisaw for either the Chargers or the Vikings would be a great pick for either one of them.
Okay, moving on to number 15, and it's the New England Patriots. Ryan, They signed a bunch of pass catchers in free agency already, but you have them taking another pass catcher in the Heisman Trophy winner, Devontae Smith.
Yeah, that's the thing, Chris. You hit on it. They signed everybody and their brother in free agency other than the quarterback position, which leads you to believe that they're probably going to be sniffing around the quarterbacks. But at 15, unless you trade up, you're not going to have anything to sift through in terms of the quarterback bin there. So I just said, let's see who the best available player is. It's Devontae Smith. He may not be here in reality. And the wide receivers they signed, Kendrick Bourne, he's a pretty good player. Nelson Aguilar is a pretty good player, but they're not game-changing talents like Devontae Smith has the potential to be. I know he's undersized at 170. He doesn't play that way. He plays so much bigger. He's so incredibly tough. He always gets open. He catches everything you throw to him. And Cam Newton's the quarterback now, but maybe he's not once the season gets going. Whoever it ends up being, get him a playmaker on the outside. N'Keal Harry, the former first-round pick, has not worked out. He struggles to get open. Devontae Smith struggles with none of those things, and I think he upgrades the unit despite all the players they've already signed in free agency.
Yeah, I like this pick, but again, history says that the Patriots haven't done a very good job of drafting the wide receiver position. Remember, going back, Chad Jackson was a second-round pick. I mean, you can go on and on. Malcolm Mitchell got hurt, and N'Keal Harry is terrible. So I don't know if they would go in that direction. I might look at a linebacker in this spot. Like Zaven Collins could be a player. He's a perfect type of Bill Belichick player. He could do so many things. He played linebacker, inside linebacker in college, and a lot of people think he can go stand up and rush the passer on the next level. So I think they might look in a different direction, but I would understand this pick to add some speed.
And Collins is still on the board. We'll see where Ryan has him go. Coming up at number 16, the Arizona Cardinals. They've already lost Patrick Peterson, Drake Kirkpatrick, and Jonathan Joseph, still free agents. So, Ryan, is it a slam dunk that they're going with a cornerback? You have them taking J.C. Horn.
It certainly feels pretty close to a slam dunk. I mean, edge rusher would be in the consideration, but they did land J.J. Watt, so maybe that's on the back burner. Maybe you circle back in rounds 2 or 3 or later to sort that out. But I don't know if J.C. Horn's going to be here. He is such a good, physical, strong at the point of attack player. He battles the contested catches. He gives wide receivers fits, and you could argue that maybe he's too handsy at times. But you'd rather be too physical than not physical enough. He is a big cornerback. I think he listed at around 6'1" at his pro day. There's a lot to like about what he does. Obviously, his dad's Joe Horn, and it makes sense for Arizona. I just question whether he'll be here, especially now that Caleb Farley could be slipping a little bit because of the back surgery. That could push up guys like Patrick Surtain, who's already a top 10 talent, and guys like J.C. Horn, who aren't far behind in terms of their evaluation and their chance to be effective as soon as they get on an NFL roster.
All right, we're staying out west with the Vegas Raiders, who are coming up at number 17. And Pete, he has them taking Azeez Ojulari, the linebacker out of Georgia.
Yeah, and I love this kid. I think this kid's going to be a big-time player on the next level, and they need pass rush help. The only problem with that is, are they admitting their mistake on taking Clelin Ferrell where they took him? And remember, this is the same regime that made that pick. Max Crosby's a good, steady rusher on the other side. They did sign Yannick Ngakoue in free agency. I think they might look at corner here. I think that's a strong possibility. They have a couple guys, young guys in Mullen and Arnett who didn't quite play up to expectations. But I can see where they could look at the pass rush, but then they're admitting a mistake on Clelin Ferrell, who was drafted, 4th overall, and I don't know if Mike Mayock and John Gruden are ready to do that just yet.
I don't know that, Pete, you would ever admit a mistake, certainly if you were in a front office. But sometimes you have to, right? Sometimes you've got to do it. I mean, if it's best for the Raiders franchise moving forward, maybe you do it. Moving to the Miami Dolphins, who took Jamar Chase at number 6 in Ryan Wilson's mock. Ryan, you have him going offense again, but on the offensive line in Tevin Jenkins.
Yeah, Tevin Jenkins out of Oklahoma State. And Pete and I have talked about this before, he plays angry. He plays with an edge, and that's exactly what you want in an offensive lineman. Played mostly right tackle at Oklahoma State. Played a little left tackle and did it at a high level, so that's also an option. But they have Austin Jackson. They have Robert Hunt, last year's 1st and 2nd round pick. You can kick Robert Hunt back inside, have Tevin Jenkins on the right side, and now you're cooking with gas. Again, protect Tua. We talked about protect these franchise quarterbacks. We saw the graphic there. They took Jamar Chase with the first round pick. Now you come back and protect him with an offensive tackle who is a very angry young man in the way he plays. carries. 18, I think, is probably the first glimpse we could see a running back coming off the board, but I don't think it comes this high just because the Dolphins have a ton of picks and they have other needs, and there are enough running backs in this draft class you can circle back later in later rounds and find your guy. But I think if Tevin Jenkins is here, or a similar type offensive tackle like Pete's guy Christian Darrisaw, that has to be a focus for the Dolphins, who need to get better on offense.
Okay, speaking of needing to get better on offense, you've got the Washington football team coming up at number 19. We know that the defense was really good last season. The offense was really lacking. But Pete, Ryan has him going defense. I know it's a guy you like in Zaven Collins, the linebacker, but does this make sense for where Washington is right now?
It makes sense because they need help at the position. I just don't think he'll be there when they pick. I think Jamin Davis would be a perfect pick for them in this spot. I understand you need help at linebacker. I think he'd be a perfect guy in this situation. Some people, like I said, see Zaven Collins as a stand-up rush outside linebacker, and in that scenario, that doesn't fit what Washington does as a football team. Cornerback is another position of need, and there's also a need for more help at wide receiver. I know they added Curtis Samuel, but they need a bigger receiver on the outside to go with him and Terry McLaurin. So I do understand the need. I just don't think this is the player they would pick.
Okay, rounding out the teams with Zaven Collins there at number 19. The Chicago Bears are at number 20. Maybe they try to trade up into the top 10 to get a quarterback, but Ryan, they went out, they got Andy Dalton, and you have them getting him some protection. Got to protect QB1, the Red Rifle. Samuel Cosmi is the pick, the offensive lineman out of Texas.
As a Bears fan, Chris, I detect the sarcasm in your voice, presumably because you're laying it on pretty thick there. Yeah, so Andy Dalton, QB1. How many times can you say that and not giggle about it? But here we are. Samuel Cosmi is an incredibly athletic left tackle. He plays incredibly strong. He moves well in space. You need to bolster the offensive line. You can certainly go wide receiver here and help Andy Dalton get him more weapons, but I think you need to build from the inside out, and this is sort of a recurring theme in this first round with all these offensive tackles going off the board. But there are a lot of good offensive tackles, which is why this is happening. He played really well at Texas throughout his career. He can play a little right tackle, did a great job protecting Sam Ehlinger, and I think that if he's here, he makes sense for a Bears team that seems dead set on going forward with Andy Dalton. Not something I would necessarily do, or most Bears fans. I would think about trading up and getting a quarterback, but that's not the world we live in, so they go with offensive tackle.
You have a great read on the pulse of a Bears fan right now, Ryan Wilson. Thank you so much. Stick around because we have more of this first-round mock to fill out, and we still haven't taken a running back. Ryan mentioned round 18 or so, he expects the running backs to maybe start hearing their names called. Travis Etienne, Najee Harris still out there. Continuing with Ryan Wilson's latest mock draft, a bunch of quarterbacks went top 10, 5 of them in fact, so no quarterbacks in the teens. We did have the Heisman Trophy winner Devontae Smith go number 15 to the New England Patriots. Moving into the 20s now, and the Indianapolis Colts at number 21 with Ryan Wilson and Pete Prisco. Ryan, you have him taking Greg Newsome, the defensive back out of Northwestern.
Yeah, Chris, Greg Newsome is coming off a great season for Northwestern. The Colts would obviously love to get an offensive tackle here, but so many have gone off the board already that they're going to go in another direction. They brought back Xavier Rhodes on a one-year deal. They have Kenny Moore and Rock Yassin, but not much after that in the secondary. So they go with Greg Newsome, who is a first-round talent all day long. It could end up going a little bit higher than this. Feels a huge need in the secondary, and I think it makes sense here if there are no offensive tackles available for the Colts.
Speaking of offensive linemen, they had Rashawn Slater out of Northwestern going number 12 to the Eagles. So 2 Northwestern players in the top 21. Moving on to the Tennessee Titans at 22, Pete. Ryan has them taking Kwity Paye, the defensive lineman. What does that do for you?
Yeah, and this is a team that desperately needs to get help at pass rush. I know they signed Bud Dupree, but you look, they had 14 sacks last year and still made the playoffs. It's one of the lowest numbers ever for a playoff team. They need to improve that. Kwity Paye has a ton of ability. Didn't get a lot of sacks, though, and that's a concern. I think he's a little bit of a project, but I understand the pick.
All right, and here come the Jets again at number 23 after taking Zach Wilson at number 2. Ryan, you have him going with a running back here, Travis Etienne at number 23. That would be really exciting if you're a Jets fan.
You would think so. That's right. Najee Harris is my running back 1, but Travis Etienne is not far behind, and he does everything well. He runs hard between the tackles. He can bounce it outside. He's a threat in the pass game. So all the things you want to help your young quarterback with. And just so we know, because we're not talking about the second round here, had him taking Zach Wilson early in the round, second overall pick. Travis Etienne here. In round 2, I haven't taken Caleb Farley, the cornerback, who falls early round 2 because of that back injury. So that's a pretty good haul if you're a Jets fan. You get a running back to help your quarterback here at the bottom of round 1.
Okay, so those are the mock picks for the New York Jets. Zach Wilson at number 2, now that they've traded away Sam Darnold, and Travis Etienne at number 23. The Pittsburgh Steelers up at number 24. Pete, Jason Oweh, the edge out of Penn State. They do have lots of needs. Is this one of the main ones here, in your opinion?
Well, I mentioned that Bud Dupree left and they need to get a young pass rusher. I understand this. I just think this kid's going to take a little time. He has a ton of ability. He is one of the most amazing athletic guys in this entire draft. But again, raw, hadn't played a lot of football. It's going to need a little time. And now you're talking about standing him up in their defense. So I think they have better options here. But I would understand the need of the position for sure.
Okay, that's at number 24. The Jacksonville Jaguars are up at number 25, and Ryan has them taking the number 1 safety in this draft. Pete, Trevon Moehrig.
Yeah, look, they don't really need a safety. It would be a nice pick. He's a good player, and I think he's going to be a first-round pick. But they signed Rashawn Jenkins. They drafted Daniel Thomas last year. They have some other guys who have started back there. That's not a great position of need. What is a position need is speed. Remember, before the free agency started, Urban Meyer said, I have to address my defensive line, and I have to get faster. Well, he addressed the defensive line with a couple of signings and a trade of Malcolm Brown, but he hasn't gotten any faster. And I think when you look at that in this scenario, the guy who is sitting there, Kadarius Toney, would be a much better pick than drafting a safety who's a good player, but they don't really need him back there.
Ryan, why not Toney there at 25 to the Jags quickly?
It was a consideration, but Pete will be happy to know in the 2-round mock draft, Trevor Lawrence, Trevon Moehrig, Javonte Williams, and Rondale Moore. Pete, does that make you feel better?
And again, he could be in play in this spot too.
Yeah, we've seen Rondale Moore in the first round rather of the draft in Ryan's mock many times. Moving on to 26, Cleveland Browns. Ryan, you got him taking Carlos Basham, the edge out of Wake Forest.
Yeah, he's sort of flown under the radar among all the other edge rushers we talk about. He played at Wake Forest, but he played really well. Incredibly athletic, very stout. And look, you pair him opposite Myles Garrett, you're working with something there. So there's not going to be a situation where he's asked to do everything as an edge rusher, because Myles Garrett will get most of the attention early on. And then you have another edge rusher on a defense that's young and athletic and should only get better. So I love Boogie Basham here late in the first round to help that Browns front four.
Okay, we are late in the first round, and there still are some wide receivers out there who we've seen taken in the first round of many mocks. We mentioned Rondale Moore. We mentioned Kadarius Toney. Pete thought that the Jacksonville Jaguars would have taken him there at number 25. Ryan had them taking a safety instead. So where does Toney go? We'll finish out the first round of the mock next. Finishing up Ryan Wilson's first round mock. He did go 2 rounds deep on this latest one. You can find the whole mock, both rounds, on CBSSports.com. We're just doing the first round here. We're closing it out. Moving to number 27 with Ryan Wilson and Pete Prisco. And Pete was a little bit upset that Ryan didn't have the Jacksonville Jaguars taking Kadarius Toney at number 25. Ryan, you've got the Baltimore Ravens taking Kadarius Toney there at number 27. Why is this one of your favorite picks of the draft?
So Kadarius Toney's only 5'11", but he plays so much bigger than that. And in mock drafts past, I've thought about having a bigger wide receiver go here to offset what they have in Hollywood Brown. Someone like Terrace Marshall at LSU maybe makes sense. But Kadarius Toney plays so much bigger. He's so dynamic. You can use him at all 3 levels. He's a running back basically with the ball in his hands, and I think he provides that dynamism that this offense is lacking in the pass game. Take the pressure off Lamar Jackson in terms of pushing the ball down the field. You can rely on Kadarius Toney and those tight ends on the short and underneath stuff. And then let Marquise Hollywood Brown and Miles Boykin take care of the deep routes. I think it's a good fit and could be one of these picks you don't really think about until it happens, and then it clicks and like, oh, yeah, this makes a lot of sense here.
All right, that is number 27. At number 28, it's the New Orleans Saints. And Pete, Jalen Phillips, the defensive lineman, is the pick.
Yeah, this would be a good pick for the Saints. Remember, Trey Hendrickson left via free agency, and they have a hole there on the other side opposite Cam Jordan. Even though Davenport is still there, he wasn't the player that Hendrickson was. So I think they need to add another pass rusher. Jalen Phillips is a guy with a ton of physical ability. There are concerns about his health at times. Remember, he had concussion issues at UCLA and then transferred to Miami. So it'll be interesting to keep an eye on that situation. But this would make a ton of sense for the Saints.
He's got to love that piece of tape, just throwing down Trevor Lawrence in the backfield a couple of years ago. Moving on to the Packers at number 29. The pick here is Levi Onwuzurike. Ryan, why no Rondale Moore in this spot? I know you had him here each of the last few drafts, I think.
Yeah, that's a great question, Chris. And I was talking to a scout about this a few weeks ago. When Rondale Moore came in at 5'7" at his pro day, there were concerns that can you take a 5'7" wide receiver in the first round? Now, obviously, fit makes a ton of sense. In Green Bay, is there a better fit than that for a player like Rondale Moore in that skill set? But I think some NFL teams may be scared off a little bit by the size. You have the Tyreek Hills of the world, but Tyreek Hill is certainly taller than 5'7". So they go with Onwuzurike on the inside. They have Kenny Clark, but not a lot else. But certainly wide receiver is a huge need. And if Aaron Rodgers learned anything, the Packers won't take one in the first round. So maybe he should think more about getting help on the defense, where Onwuzurike would certainly make sense here.
Okay, moving on to number 30 and the Buffalo Bills. You know, they already have Trey White, who's one of the best cornerbacks in the league. But, Pete, Ryan has him taking another quarterback, Tyson Campbell, because of the lack of depth behind White. What'd you think of that?
Yeah, and they brought back Levi Wallace, but they still need help there at that position. I think that is indeed a position in need. I don't know if Campbell would be the guy I would pick in this spot. I think there are better options. They might even be a team, as this would play out, that would take Caleb Farley and take their chances with him with his back injury. I know he had him falling into the second round, but they could absolutely take a chance like that. And I also think Stokes, the other corner at Georgia, is an interesting guy, really runs very well and is a good player as well. So there are options there. The position makes sense because they definitely need help at corner.
Okay, moving to number 31, the runner-ups this past season, the Kansas City Chiefs are there, and it's Gregory Rousseau. It's another defensive lineman out of Miami. We just saw Jalen Phillips go at number 28 to the New Orleans Saints. Ryan, why'd you have Rousseau going to the Chiefs?
Well, they need a lot of help off the edge. They have Frank Clark, obviously. Didn't live up to expectations. He didn't have the year he was hoping he would have in 2020. Get him help, and you can do that with Greg Rousseau. He opted out in 2020 for the U. Jalen Phillips emerged wearing that number 15. But Gregory Rousseau is a first-round talent. Hasn't played the position very long, converted wide receiver. So he has a chance to grow into that role, and grow into that role on a really good team where the expectations won't be for him to go out there and get 15 sacks in year one. He'll play opposite Frank Clark and have an opportunity to get after the quarterback with a little help on the opposite side of the field.
Greg Rousseau is the star of getting off the bus. And by that I mean when he walks off the bus, everybody's going to look at him and go, oh my gosh, this guy can rush the passer. He has all the tools. He's big, he's strong, he's fast. And remember, had he not opted out, there was talk about him being a top 10 pick, maybe even higher than that. And in a class of not great pass rushers, he probably hurt himself a little bit by not playing. Maybe the Chiefs in this scenario get a real steal if they get Greg Rousseau here.
Okay, one more pick in Ryan Wilson's first round of his two-round mock. And it's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers who, I don't know, Ryan, do they have any needs? You have them taking an offensive lineman, Jalen Mayfield, here.
Yeah, that's the thing, Chris. There are not a ton of needs. They signed everybody back from the Super Bowl roster except for Antonio Brown. We'll see what happens there. So I figure, well, if you're bringing back 44-year-old Tom Brady, you might as well protect him. Jalen Mayfield played right tackle at Michigan. He could play guard if you need him to, so he provides some depth there once you move on from some of the interior linemen whose contracts will be up after the season. That's the thinking there. They could very well trade down if another team wants to move up for another player, stockpile picks, because as you point out, they are set heading into 2021.
Yeah, I don't think they would take an offensive lineman in this spot. I think Javonte Williams would be a great pick for them in this spot if they could get him, the running back out of North Carolina. They need to amp up the speed out of the backfield. I know his 40 time wasn't great, but he plays fast. Here's another one. What if they took a quarterback here? And, you know, people say, well, why would you take a quarterback? You're eventually going to have to get yourself a quarterback in the future. What if a guy like Davis Mills or Kellen Mond were one of those guys in that scenario where they decided to take a flyer on a quarterback? Because eventually Tom Brady's not going to be able to play until he's 60.
That would certainly raise a lot of eyebrows if the Bucs went with a quarterback there at the end of the first round. We didn't have any quarterbacks go after what? Pick 9, I believe, going back. The first 5 quarterbacks went in the top 10 for sure. Ryan Wilson, full mock, 2 rounds on CBSSports.com. Pete Prisco has a new mock coming out next week. Here's a recap of how the first round ended. Kadarius Toney to the Baltimore Ravens at 27. No Rondale Moore to the Packers this time. They go with the defensive lineman instead. And Jalen Mayfield once again to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Pick 6 podcast, all things NFL each and every day. It's our pod hosted by Will Brinson. The latest episode released this morning, hitting the mailbag. How underrated is Patrick Mahomes' contract? Who's going to win the AFC North? And who'd be the best head coach, Brady, Manning, or Rodgers? Want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis. No yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.